I should be Adam. God was proud of Adam, but Satan's the one I sympathize with. This is the No Fear podcast. We know what scares you. I'm Matt.
I'm Mel.
And I'm Lisa. And this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. This is season 4, episode 19, and today we are discussing Frankenstein at National Theater Live.
So I think I'm going to get this episode going. I guess it was, I don't know, time is relative now and staying at home, but I guess it was like a week or maybe a little bit over a week ago that I had friends who were telling me that they were watching different plays on National Theater Live. So what the National Theater is doing is it's partially a fundraising event, but it's also to give people something to watch while they're at home. Every week for a few weeks now, they've been posting on their YouTube channel filmed versions, films basically of plays that they've done in the past. I believe they're doing a Streetcar Named Desire next, but I happened to notice that they were going to be showing the Frankenstein that was out several years ago. So this particular play of Frankenstein was filmed in 2011. It was when the two leads, Johnny Lee Miller and Benedict Cumberbatch, were switching parts every night. So one night, one would be Dr. Frankenstein and the other would be the creature, and then vice versa. And I remember when this was out, I was like, oh, it's too bad I can't go, over to London and see this, but I couldn't. So I was super excited when I saw that this was going to be something that we could see. And they were doing it in a really interesting way. Instead of just having the one YouTube channel, they did 2 streams. So for a week, I believe this will be over by the time this episode drops, but we posted about it on our Facebook page. For about a week or so, if you watched one channel, you would get Johnny Lee Miller as a creature. If you watched the other channel, you would get Benedict Cumberbatch as the creature. So you could choose what you want to watch. And so between the 3 of us, we have watched both versions. Now, of course, Frankenstein is based on Mary Shelley's novel. The play that they were performing was written by Nick Dear and was directed by Danny Boyle, who has also directed Trainspotting and Slumdog Millionaire. And the set design, which I think we'll probably end up talking about the set a bit because the set was pretty fascinating to me. It was like spare, but also it was an interesting set. It was really cool. But the set designer was Mark Tildesley. And I think what we're going to do is, after giving a little bit of that background, I'm going to throw it to you, Lisa, and Matt, and kind of see what your reactions were. So what did you all think? Which version did you watch, and what did you think?
Well, I guess I'll go first. I had actually wanted to watch both of them, but just did not have time, unfortunately. The one that I watched was the one with Benedict Cumberbatch played the doctor and Johnny Lee Miller was the monster. And I thought it was incredible, to be honest. It was... I didn't know what to expect going in because I purposefully kind of didn't really read up too much about this. I had not heard about it really before you had mentioned it. But I love Benedict Cumberbatch. He's great. And Danny Boyle is just a phenomenal director in general. By the way, you left out 28 Days Later, his horror entry as a director. But so I was definitely curious. And I thought it was great. The set was a very unique interpretation of how to use the stage for a set, and I guess we can go more into detail with that later. But and I thought both Cumberbatch and Miller were excellent, and Miller in particular as the monster was just a phenomenal performance. I think we can go into more detail on this, but I'll let Lisa kind of respond as well before we do that.
Yeah, I actually watched the other one than you did, so I'm kind of glad that I did because, like you, Matt, I didn't have time to watch both of them because it is a full 2 hours. 2 hours well spent, but it's still 2 hours to sit down and watch. So I didn't have time to watch both of them, but I actually watched the one where Johnny Lee Miller played Dr. Frankenstein and Benedict Cumberbatch played the creature. And then what I did actually after I watched it was I went back to maybe 3 or 4 key scenes, or at least scenes that I felt were key to the play, and watched them in the other version just so I could see how the 2 actors interpreted it a little bit differently. And it was really neat because you could see how both Miller and Cumberbatch played the parts slightly differently, I thought. I think if I had to pick one, because they were both fantastic, like this play just, it made me so happy and it was so good and I'm so glad we had to watch it. I'm gonna say I think I liked Johnny Lee Miller as the creature just slightly better, and I liked Benedict Cumberbatch as Dr. Frankenstein a little bit better. Mainly because they both played the creature really well, but Johnny Lee Miller played it. They both had this kind of. It's going to be hard to describe, but when they showed the creature, I don't know if you want to call it coming alive and then learning about the world around him. They both played it very, very much almost like a toddler exploring, um, where, and you can understand where that would come from because he didn't have any sense of what the world was because nobody was there to explain it to him. So he had to kind of walk around exploring his using his senses and using his emotions, which he didn't fully understand. And they both played that really well. But I thought towards the end, Johnny Lee Miller showed the creature learning a little bit more of kind of an intellectual and emotional maturity that was really neat, more than I think Cumberbatch did. And I really liked Cumberbatch playing the doctor because I think he showed a little less, like Johnny Lee Miller played the revulsion part of the doctor, at least the doctor's reaction to the creature throughout the whole thing. And I think Benedict Cumberbatch kind of walked the line between revulsion and fascination, but also this great like ego of look what I did, um, which I think layered the Dr. Frankenstein character a little bit more. So for what that's worth. That's what I thought. But yeah, I can't wait to really get into talking about both the adaptation, how they took Shelley's novel and what they kind of focused on in the play, but also the set design because that really was my favorite part of this. But I loved it. I loved this idea of having two actors to switch off parts. I hope we see a lot more of this. Mel, you were the one who brought it to our attention. I think I had heard about it, but I didn't realize they were showing it on YouTube. So I'm glad that you had told me they were. Which version did you watch?
I watched the version where Johnny Lee Miller was the creature, and I didn't have time to go through all the major scenes with Cumberbatch as the creature, but I did watch the kind of quote unquote birth scene of Cumberbatch as the monster and one other scene. And from what I saw, I kind of agree with what you were saying that I felt, I don't know, I think I might have liked Cumberbatch just a little bit better as a doctor as well. Not like they didn't, they're both amazing actors and I love both of them. Benedict Cumberbatch, I'm a fan of his from Sherlock's, of course, and Johnny Lee Miller. I love the show Elementary. They were both Sherlocks at some point. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's because I saw Johnny Lee Miller's creature first, so I kind of felt a little bit more comfortable with him as a creature. But I agree with you that I think if I was going to rank them, it would be a thin sliver, but maybe Miller as a creature because yeah, the kind of development or maturation of the creature as it dealt with what I thought was fascinating. It was like basically learning from Paradise Lost, which of course is like a cognate text to Frankenstein, and he's quoting it throughout the entire play and kind of learning from it and trying to figure it out where his place is. But yeah, Cumberbatch just played that ego and that callousness of the doctor in a way that I don't know. I dislike Dr. Frankenstein way more watching the play than I did, if I remember right, when I read the book, which has been several years. And yeah, the set was fantastic because it would be spare at some points, which would be trying to help you understand like the monster's isolation and how he's reacting to things or the creature. And then other times it would be kind of intricate, like the birth scene with almost like the embryonic aspect, the use of the lighting, all the different lights to make it seem like lightning or electricity. Yeah, I mean, I'm really glad. I'm sad that it was because of pandemic that I got to see it, but I'm really glad that I got to see it because I felt like it was a really great interpretation of the book. One other thing that I really liked is I don't remember that much about Elizabeth from the book. I feel like she didn't really say very much. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just misremembering. But I like the development of her character and her relationship with Frankenstein and the creature too. So yeah, those are my thoughts. I'm glad I got to see it. I was really impressed and I really enjoyed it.
I'm glad
Yeah.
you mentioned Elizabeth, because one, just as a tangential side, going back to 28 Days Later and Danny Boyle, she was actually in 28 Days Later, so she had worked with Danny Boyle before. Uh, but I liked the development of her as well too. She seemed like she was not just a prop for pain to be instilled on Victor by the monster, which yeah, I think is a good thing.
She definitely has the best line, I think, in the play. Um, because when she just says, "What is wrong with you men?" I thought that kind of encapsulates the entire theme of both Shelley's novel and this play is just what is wrong with you? Um, and I think I found that really interesting because that has been I've read Frankenstein a lot. It's one of my favorite novels. I've taught it quite a bit, and I think when you talk about the theme of it, a lot of people want to talk about how it's kind of a cautionary tale about science, and there's the idea that, well, just because we can do it, should we do it? And Frankenstein is like held up as this idea of, well, that's what you do when you just go out to prove what you can do without thinking about the implications. And that's important. But when I teach it, I like to teach it from, I mean, a little bit from Elizabeth's point of view and a little bit from what I think Mary Shelley might have been working with. And so one of the things I talk a lot about when I teach it is the science of the day, because I mean, this was a science fiction novel as much as it was a horror novel. And one of the things that Shelley knew a lot about, in part through her relationship with Percy Bysshe Shelley, but just also of her own studies, she knew a lot about the science of the day. And one of the scientific kind of theories about how life happens. I mean, kind of pushing aside all the electricity part because Percy Bysshe Shelley was just absolutely obsessed with electricity. So she knew a lot about that part of it too. But the idea of like where life comes from, and it was this idea that life was given by men and that women were just kind of the fertilized earth that grew life. So a lot of the real science of the day and the kind of philosophers of the day thought, well, there may be one way that we can kind of get rid of those pesky females and just have life in its purest form, meaning just coming down from men, like just being the rational side of things, not the emotional side of things, not, all these kind of weird gender ideas. And I think that was one of the things too that Shelley was working with in the novel, was that you can't have life by ignoring the female side, the feminine side of things. And that was part of the problem with Frankenstein, of course. Frankenstein's creature is that he doesn't have a mother figure, that he's just created, and he doesn't have that kind of nurturing side to him. But it's also just the idea of creating life without women at all, trying to write that out of there. Um, and I found that fascinating because when Elizabeth's line, when she says, "What is wrong with you men?" I feel like she's giving voice to that. Again, maybe it's because I taught it for so long. And so I was really reading deeply into it, where maybe the play didn't go there as much as I wanted it to. Um, but I liked what they did with her character, and I wish we had gotten just a little bit more. And I agree with you, Matt. I love the actress too. Um, so I don't know. Thank you for listening to my rant on Frankenstein. Um, but that's one of the themes that I like to teach when I do it, and I feel like they played with it a little bit. Um, what did you think? Okay, going back a little bit to what the play actually says, when it talks about Milton's Paradise Lost, and one of the things I did like is how they showed it more of the creatures, his real education using that, and how he doesn't learn emotions from the books and from the history books, but he learns what he's supposed to do with those emotions. So like if he feels angry, that's something that's already within him, but he learns revenge through the books. Like he learns, okay, this is what men do. And I think there's even a line, I wish I had written it down now, in the play where he says, well, this is what men do when they feel angry. They go get revenge. And for him, revenge means violence. And that's, of course, the really heartbreaking scene where he first burns down the family's house after the family has rejected him. I don't know. What did you think of how they kind of developed his character and how he learned to be quote unquote human? Because I found it fascinating. I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I liked how they did. Well, first, just to go back, one of the things I was thinking when you were talking about the idea of women and reproduction or science is, at one point when Elizabeth finds out that Frankenstein has just who only married her to have a bait for the creature so he could catch it. He says to her at one point that what he did was genius because he needs to quote strip nature of her secrets, and I thought it was interesting that nature was kind of feminized there, and he was going to strip it in kind of a sexual and also violent description there, so that he, as the male genius, can have that power. So I definitely think that there's something going on there with like the idea of like gendering science and nature, and what Frankenstein wanted to do, which would lead to trying to emphasize Elizabeth a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I'm not a Milton expert, but I did like the way they use that, and all, like you said, all the books that the creature was reading. Because yeah, there were a couple points where he would say, "Well, where what would so and so do in this book that I just read, or in these dialogues I just read?" And I thought it's interesting on a couple different levels. One is he's trying to learn how to be human, but all he seems to learn throughout the entire play is that the humans are the monsters. And so he's like trying really hard to reach out to them naively and almost like innocently. And he's caught in the beginning of the play when you're kind of confused as to how time is working and where he is. He's getting beaten, he's getting burned, he's getting yelled at. He has such a hard time. And then even when he learns how to communicate, which he thinks is how he'll be able to make connections with people, they still think he's horrible, and they still attack him because they just think he's a monster without even speaking to him. It's only the man who's blind that he creates a relationship with. And so I thought it was interesting that as he matures, or as he becomes better at communicating, he still cannot make connections with others. And he starts to, like you said, interpret everything through the books that he's read. So he's like, I should be Adam, but I would rather be Satan because I sympathize with him. And this is what people do when they're mad. And he even does that with Elizabeth because she says, "Well, we can make an alliance, and I will help you help you make Frankenstein take responsibility. We can stand up for the downtrodden and give voice to the oppressed." And she says all this stuff, and then he's like, "Your husband taught me only one thing, and that is how to break your word. And because he broke his word, I must break my word." It's this idea of vengeance. And I think it's a mix between like the treatment he receives from human beings and his observations of humans, and then the stuff that he reads that causes him to feel this way. Because if he only gets attacked and is only a victim of violence, he's going to start reacting that way. And then, interestingly enough, he sees those sorts of conflicts and uses of violence in the literature that he's reading. Yeah, I thought that was interesting. And also that scene when he and Frankenstein are arguing over the body of the female creature, and Frankenstein's like, "Well, I don't know if I should make this woman and give her to you." And he's like, "I need a companion, force her to love me." Neither of the men understand what love is, which I thought was really interesting, because Frankenstein is like, "What does love mean?" And the creature says, "Well, in this book I read, this is what love is." And Frankenstein's like, "You don't understand love," but he doesn't either. And I think that plays off the idea that they're both half a person in a way and kind of fulfill each other, even though they both are repulsed by each other. But even though the creature really wants a companion and really wants to love, his concept of love is just what he's learned from reading. He's not actually experiencing these things. He just wants he wants the woman to be created so he can make someone be his companion and love him. But that's not necessarily how that works. And Frankenstein, of course, doesn't understand love because his ego is so large. So, yeah, I feel like it's sad for the creature because all his examples of humanity are so, I don't know what the word is, lacking. And then he's mimicking the stuff that he sees other people do and the way they react to him as a type of protection, rather than getting the education that he wishes he could get.
Yeah, the creation of the bride character was actually that was my favorite scene, I think, in the entire play. As far as like the dialogue goes, I had different favorite scenes based on the set design, but we'll talk about that later. Um, but the scene where he does create the companion for his creature, that was really difficult to watch, I thought, because you did see the worst of both characters, both the doctor and the creatures, confusing love for control. And then also, I mean, both of them have pretty sizable egos as well. Because I mean, when she kind of walks out and they make a point of saying, "Oh, she looks so much better," and the creature even asked for that at one point. He says, "When you create her, make sure she doesn't look as hideous as I am." And I guess kind of the underlying idea there is so she's not rejected. But I think he also wants a beautiful, pleasing mate. And then the doctor even, I mean, he's literally objectifying. And just since this is a podcast and you're not watching this, we'll kind of show the woman who walks out, she's completely nude with the exception of like a covering over, I mean, basically like a bikini bottom type covering. And her scars and cuts are much more fine than the creatures are. So she does look better. But the way Victor Frankenstein, when he's talking about her, he doesn't just show her. I mean, he caresses her and he takes her in his arms. And at one point, I noticed in both versions, he kisses her, because that was a scene that I watched in both of the versions to see how they played. And it is very uncomfortable, I thought, for me to watch, because here you have two men literally fighting, which is, I mean, this is the core of every good gothic story, is you have two men fighting over a woman's body here. um but when he's kind of praising her and how she looks, when the doctor is doing that, he's also praising his own ego, he's praising his own skill. And when he's trying to suss out whether or not the creature can understand love, you're right, Mel, that it is all about dominance. um and I think when Victor kills her, it's not just to be devastating to the creature. It's that for him, I think it's the loss of control over her and her, because again, it's loss of control over her body. Because why does he want to kill her so badly? Well, it's because he's had this idea that, oh no, what if they can reproduce? Like, what if they can go and make their own kind basically without me? And on one hand, you can look at it, well, that may be a real fear that he's creating a race of monsters. But I think for Victor Frankenstein, it's the lack of control there. And I think that is what terrified him about his creature to begin with, was that he had, not that he had brought about life, he was very proud of himself for doing that. And he was very proud of himself when he realizes that his creature can reason, right? Like, oh, you can talk, you can walk, you can reason. He talks at one point, he's like, look at your hand-eye coordination, look at what I've done. But it's the idea that he no longer has control, that it's a separate thing. And so bringing about the female creature, that, I don't know, that was just such a great scene, and a very uncomfortable one. But I think it really hits at, when Elizabeth says, what is the problem with you men, that is it, that they are mistaking love and compassion for control and dominance, and that's always going to be their downfall, that and their bloodlust, their kind of violent revenge that the creature does learn. Somebody had brought up a point when I was reading about Frankenstein, the play version. I was reading some critics writing about it, and one of the things they said was that what would have happened if the creature had a mother? Like, what if Elizabeth had been a part of it, like she wanted to be? Like she wanted to know what was happening in Victor's life and in his studies and in his work. Like, what would have happened if she had been there from the beginning? If the creature had a mother and that kind of nurturing um, impulse, like would he have known more of what love was? And the point was made that no, probably not, because eventually he'd still go out into the world, and all these problems that are deep seated in Victor are also out in the world, and that's why he learned them from reading all the books too, and from people's reactions. So I thought that was a really interesting idea too. That even though that's a big part of the problem, that they don't understand kind of the feminine side of things, that even had he had that from the beginning, he probably still would have been in the same place, because it's a problem with the greater society and not just in Victor himself.
I could see that. And I think in some ways that's kind of why I liked, well, and I think Matt mentioned this earlier too, why I like the scene between the creature and Elizabeth in the play, being in the play. Because if I'm remembering right, when Elizabeth is killed in the book out of the creature's vengeance, it's just like the creature killed her. I mean, I don't remember them having any long conversation. It's like Frankenstein is off looking for him and he kills her, and then Frankenstein finds out. But in the play, they have this long conversation and debate where she's like, "Well, how are you made?" And because she doesn't know all this, and she's kind of trying to teach him like a weird kind of forgiveness aspect while they're having this debate. And I thought it was really interesting because you see the potential for growth in the monster, but then you see like how his hatred and the terrible treatment that he's had from Frankenstein still is like, well, no, I've got to continue on this revenge and therefore kill you. But I mean, some of the things that she says, she specifically says, like you said, Lisa, what's wrong with you men? She talks about how she wants to work with the monster to give voice to the oppressed and stand up for the downtrodden. I don't, even in Mary Shelley's book, I don't think Elizabeth would have been saying these things per se. And there's this moment where you use your imagination, you could see not like necessarily her becoming a mother to it, but them forming an alliance. That there's some way that because both of them are treated as inferior in this society. I mean, Frankenstein tells her to her face twice in the play that you are inferior to me. You are not as smart as me. You never can be. And he treats both of them the same. And I think there's this glimpse of them maybe being able to ally with each other, which I thought was a really interesting revisioning of that part of the play. He's still, like you said, Lisa, has learned this like control and vengeance from the stuff he's read and the observations he's made. But there's that potential for them to kind of band together almost like against Frankenstein, or to do something that would counteract Frankenstein's influence on the creature. And it seemed like an additional tragedy to me in the play, that not only was Elizabeth killed because of something she had nothing to do with, but there was this potential for her to create a connection to the creature that was then taken away because the creature has just been, I guess, pushed so hard by everything he's observed and everything that's happened to him.
I think it also bears mentioning with Elizabeth the casting choice for her. The actress that plays her is black, and so I think that also kind of helps further on that what you were saying about trying to be voices for the downtrodden and whatnot. So just wanted to toss that out as well.
No, that's true. And how infuriating when Victor is telling her like, you'll never be as smart as me, and she's so quick to like point out, she's like, well, they never let me be educated, but I can learn. And that was a point too where it kind of echoes what the creature is going through. Like, just because that part of society was denied to her doesn't mean it doesn't have any bearing on her intellect. And it was both heartbreaking for me to watch and also really frustrating because she loves Victor so much and she wants to help Victor, and he is just so dumb and bullheaded and infuriatingly egotistic throughout this thing that I had a hard time. I mean, I don't feel for him in the book either, but um the book, at least, because it spends, just in talking about the differences, the book spends so much time going into like before the creature's ever created, and so you get to know Victor like the scholar, and you get to know this like when he's by himself with his studies, and this like this hopeful eagerness about him that even if you don't feel sorry for him by the end of it, you at least have some connection. But this place starts with the birth of the creature. And so I think it's much easier to align ourselves as the audience with the creature's plight and what he's going through and how scary it must be to enter into a world where there's nobody, like there's nobody to help him, there's nobody to explain things to him. And I think that just kind of reiterates, both Matt and Mel, what y'all were saying about it being a voice for the downtrodden, and how disorienting that can be when you don't have an ally in society and you just are kind of pushed out there with no support, with no yeah, I mean, without anything.
But not to mention, like the first, I believe, 10 to 15 minutes on stage is literally just the creature. We see Victor briefly, and he's aghast, and then he does not appear on stage again for a solid 45 minutes or so. Like it's almost halfway into the play before we ever see Victor Frankenstein again. So I think there's a lot in the way that this play is staged and written that really pushes us towards identifying with the monster and seeing Frankenstein as, well, more monstrous than the monster in some ways.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly what I was thinking. Is that when I watched this at the beginning, I was like, oh, I'm a little bit confused here. Not like I'm confused, I'm going to stop watching this, but I was curious. I was like, oh, this is an interesting way of setting it up, because the monster has this chaotic, confusing birth. The creature, I don't want to call him a monster because he really isn't per se. And then immediately, yeah, Frankenstein treats him with revulsion. He screams at him, get away from me, throws the thing on him to distract him and runs away. So he's born into complete confusion, literally naked, just has this coat with Frankenstein's journal in it, and is abandoned. And I think you're right, man. It's like that confusion and that complete abandonment by whatever parental figure he would have had, and then immediately being thrown into situations where people are treating him like a monster and hurting him. That's a difficult kind of trauma to get. It's not just like a single father and no mother figure. He's just been completely abandoned by whatever parental figure he could have. And then when he finally finds someone who can be nurturing toward him and help him and educate him, that person's family turns against him. And yeah, I like the way we were with the creature as he goes on this journey, because when you get to the end, you're like, well, I may not agree with everything the creature's saying, but I totally see where he's getting this from. Whereas Frankenstein was a distasteful person in the play from beginning to end. He didn't really care about the death of his brother. He just used Elizabeth. He was using the female creature. He was using the creature himself. There's definitely more sympathy for the monster. Even at the end, the creature still loves him after all this, and it doesn't want him to die. It's his purpose to continue leading him on in this weird two sides of a coin kind of thing, which I'm sure led to that promotion poster where they both have the same hairstyle, but on one side of their head, and almost like they're two sides of one coin or two sides of one person. They just can't exist without the other, no matter how much they may dislike or not trust the other.
I'm glad you mentioned the promotional poster, by the way. Listeners, I know you may not have access to the film version of the play that we watched now, but it's definitely worth looking at, because I think it was a very, very creative use of, well, like you said, Mel, kind of the two actors playing both roles kind of thing. And two sides of the same coin, so to speak. And really, I think, I mean, we've kind of talked around the point here in some ways, but I think it's kind of also just worth mentioning that I mean, Frankenstein's he's a classic narcissist. I mean, it's not just the creature, but he uses everyone else as kind of a mirror for his own greatness. It's, you know, I suspect that's would have been why he was interested in marrying Elizabeth before using her as bait for the monster, was that she would reflect how great he was, and she would be a great trophy kind of thing. And he doesn't care about the monster. You're right, creature, I should say. Like, when the creature returns, he doesn't care about the creature's plight except how it reflects Frankenstein's own intellect and greatness. And I mean, if we want to expand the metaphor out, I mean, this is what happens when people who are narcissistic parents have children. I mean, the children just end up mentally abused because of their, station, which is to reflect on how great the parent is.
Matt, I like what you said there, and kind of to add to that point, there's that conversation between Victor and Elizabeth where she says something along the line when he finally like confesses what he's been doing, because everybody knows he's been doing something. Like, as soon as his brother dies, he runs off, and his father is even, just like, what is wrong with you? Like, this is the house of mourning. What is wrong with you? And when he finally confesses to Elizabeth that he's created life, she looks at him, and at first she doesn't really believe him. She's like, "What do you mean you've created a creature?" And then she says, "If you wanted to create life, why didn't you just marry me and we could have children?" And I was really taken aback by that line. Again, Elizabeth is just so well done in this play, so well written, so well acted, but I thought, well, that's it, because Victor Frankenstein would never allow her as the mother of his children to take any of his glory away. Like, that was the point. He had to be the one alone to create a creature, to create life, because then everything would reflect back on him. And if it didn't, then it wasn't worth doing. So that's a perfect reading of him as just this egotistical tyrant almost throughout the whole play.
Yeah,
Well,
and it leaves the monster, like, all the monster or all the creature desires is for his approval and him to help guide him in some way, which is, I mean, one of the many tragedies of the story.
and ironically, at the final scene is the creature that's guiding Frankenstein along.
Yeah, that's true.
Should we talk about the ending of the play? I feel like that was my favorite scene, to be honest. But we've kind of danced around it. Should we go ahead and talk about that, or did y'all have other points that you wanted to bring up first? Or
No, I'm curious. I mean, I told y'all my favorite part of the play was when the creature's bride was brought out or whatever. But I'm curious to know, Matt, why the ending was your favorite. I mean, I liked it too a lot.
well, I can't put it into words. I guess part of it was just the performance, and Johnny Lee Miller again was the one that I saw as the creature, and his performance as the creature in that moment just sort of, it really got to me. Like, it really captivated me, especially when Frankenstein arrives. They're in the snow far north on their way to the North Pole, and then Frankenstein collapses, and you can see with Johnny Lee Miller's portrayal the what do I do now? Like, that, that emptiness once you've fulfilled your vengeance, and it's like, well, he's dead now. What more purpose do I have? But then he comes back, and it's like, now he comes back. That should be clearer. Victor Frankenstein is revived, and the play ends with them continuing this chase, and it, if anything, I mean, I do feel sorrow and pity for the creature, but at the same time, vengeance is an empty sort of thing, and once you enact your vengeance, if that's all that you've been living for, what do you have left? And so it was, for it to end with them just continuing on with this chase was just I don't know, it was just a sad reminder that if that's all that you're filling your life with, then, well, it's a fairly empty life, isn't it? And I don't know, I guess it was just the acting too that really got to me. Like they just really good performance in that scene. Not that the other scenes weren't, but yeah, I really liked that scene.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I don't know. I'm torn for my two favorite parts, whether it would be the end scene or the scene where the creature and Elizabeth are talking. Um, but the end, I thought it was really profound. Like you said, Matt, when he thinks Victor Frankenstein is dead, he actually says to him, "We are one. You can't leave me." And he says, "You didn't." At one point, he says something like, "What is death? Like you didn't teach me about death." It's this really poignant and profound moment where, like you said, like once if Frankenstein is dead, then his vengeance is over and there's a lack. But I think there's also a lack because he always wanted a connection to a parental figure. And if Frankenstein's alive, he can keep pursuing him. If he's dead, then it's over. And he even says at one point, like, "Did you ever forgive me?" But the sad thing is even if Frankenstein revives, which he does, and they chase again, at some point, one of them's going to die, probably Frankenstein, and he's never going to get the answers to those questions anyway. And so I think there's also this kind of profound sorrow in that you're seeing the ultimate end of this right there. And then it kind of revives the creature too. And he's like, "Oh, the chase can continue." But there's really no point. It's just that the two of them are tied in this bizarre uh, push and pull, the man being revolted and drawn to the thing that he created with his genius, and the creature looking for some sort of affirmation, but also angry and vengeful because he never got it. And I definitely think that plays along with your idea of the narcissistic personality. The creature is just a mirror for Frankenstein's emotions, but the creature is trying to find something back in Frankenstein, and so they're just constantly going to be in this little dyad. And so having them on that spare stage, pursuing each other, is like the perfect visualization of the end of the novel. And I don't recall them having that poignant moment in the novel. I mean, they're chasing each other, but I don't recall having that poignant moment from the creature's perspective that you do in the play. As I think it also continues to humanize the creature and help us sympathize with him.
One thing I remember about the ending scenes, especially where you just have Victor and the creature on stage together, is it highlights something that we really haven't talked about yet, is the humor that comes out at odd moments in this play. That was really kind of unexpected. And one part I remember in those ending scenes is where they're having basically a discussion, and I can't remember what they're talking about. And the creature is like, "Isn't this what we do? We dialogue." And I don't know why. There were little like lines like that I just found, where it wasn't like, I mean, rolling over laughing, but I just kind of found a little bit funny as they were going on, because there was a kind of absurdity, Mel, like you were highlighting at the end of what they're doing, and how they're so both caught up in their own vengeance and this cycle of, I don't know what they're doing, this weird dance that they're doing that has now like killed everybody around them, and like pushed everybody else away, where it's just now going to be the two of them forever chasing each other and never really finding that satisfying thing. And neither of them quite recognize the absurdity of it yet, and neither of them really notice the frustrations, I think, that the audience can recognize. But then when the creature just said, "Isn't this what we do? We dialogue," I thought, I don't know why, that was a good line. Um, this play had a lot of funny moments, despite being quite dark in places, I thought. I'm wondering if we shouldn't, maybe, because I know we've been talking about this play for a while, if we shouldn't talk about the set design for a little bit. So we mentioned at the top of this episode that this was the set design. I guess the set designer was Mark Tildesley, And I want to talk a little bit about what he did. So the stage itself, it was actually a rotating stage, and it was really breathtaking. It alternated. Of course, we've mentioned it was very sparsely decorated, and so there were just exactly what you would need and nothing more to kind of put you um, in context of the setting. And it alternated between really bright, warm colors and then really cool, muted colors. And that kind of, I think, set the mood and took you through the play. So when the play opens, it opens on one of those really warm, um, settings where you have a bunch of reds and yellows and oranges. And this is, we call it the birth scene, I guess. It, what looked like an alien pod. If you've ever been to Pandora in Disney World, to me, that's kind of what it looked like, was this kind of like Avatar-esque, like pod that the creature claws his way out of or is born from. But when this is happening, there are hundreds of light bulbs extended down from the ceiling that are glowing. And in reading about it, people would talk about, who were sitting there in the audience, that they could feel the heat of the electricity because there were so many of them, and it would just like pulse, and almost this like blinding heartbeat, this like an electric heartbeat is really what it felt like as you're watching this. And it was breathtaking. And then the creature stumbles around for a bit, and then this, as he's stumbling around, the the set is rotating and changing as he does. And so you get this, the disorienting nature of the world around him, because all of a sudden people flood in, there's noise, there's this train that I can only describe as like a steampunk interpretation of what a locomotive engine steam train would look like. And it's got people hanging off of it. People are making the noise of the train using these like megaphones. um it's, there's steam, there's smoke coming everywhere. And then the creature is horrified, um kind of runs away screaming from this loud world he doesn't understand. And then he's in nature and things start to cool down a little bit, and so you have more of the greens and the blues. You There's a strip of green grass that he lies on and rolls around as it starts raining, actually raining on the set. And so you're seeing his sensory experience of the world. And this is all within, I don't know, maybe the first 15 minutes, just establishing it. And there's not much dialogue. Obviously, the creature can't talk. Matt, you mentioned Victor showed up very briefly and then ran away. And there's some dialogue when he's in the city scene, mainly where people are talking around him and then run away screaming when they see him. So that's his like first reaction of being rejected by the world. Um, but the way the set could convey emotion and could convey mental state, especially when there wasn't a lot of dialogue, was really incredible.
I agree, and I really liked the rotating set aspect of it too, which I didn't fully recognize it at first. I think that was partly because they were kind of cutting between a couple of different camera angles in the filming of it. If I had just been sitting in the stage, it would have, or it's sitting in the stage, sitting in the audience, looking with a static view of the stage, I think it would have been more obvious to me quicker. But I loved that, and the ways that they used it. In particular, there's the round aspect of the part that rotated, but there's also um, several times where they had very long, narrow things. One was a train tracks, and one was a dock on the lake, and it was just a very interesting kind of way that they utilized the rotating part of the stage. And I also have to say, one of my favorite things, like scenery wise, was the steampunk looking train thing that happens as soon as the monster is out of the laboratory and wandering around, and meeting the people. Like it was straight up steampunk is the only way I can describe it, and I loved it.
Oh, yeah, that was good.
Yeah, I like the manipulation of the stage when I don't know what the technical term would be, but they could like drop the stage down a bit, I guess, so someone could rise up or to lead contour. And so, yeah, when they were at in the mountains, and when the creature was headed toward Geneva and there was supposed to be a lake, there was a suggestion of all that, obviously, but they had dropped the floor of the stage so that it literally did look like they were like crossing a little narrow way through like a more hilly area next to a lake. And so, yeah, they really didn't have a huge amount to work with per se, but they did a really great job of like suggesting the various locations. And one other thing I thought was really cool beyond what you guys have been mentioning is the heartbeat that begins the play, ends the play. And I thought that was a nice full circle kind of moment because the whole play has been bookended. You don't know anything about Frankenstein before the creature, right? The creature pops out of the embryonic thing, and then at the end they may be dying, but it's that relationship between the two of them has been the heartbeat of the whole play. The creature's life has been the emphasis of the whole play. So I thought that was nice having that kind of background pulse at the beginning and the end.
I agree. I loved it. I loved that it felt both. I mean, it did. You're right. It bookended nicely and kind of made it feel like one whole thing. But especially just the way it felt both organic in that it felt like a heartbeat, that it felt like something living, but at the same time, it was completely made out of electricity. And so you had those two. I mean, that's what's at war with each other within both the book and the play, right? Is like this idea of nature and invention, and when the two collide or when the two don't work together well. And that was really brilliantly done. I'd like to watch the play again in its entirety, if not to see the differences between the two actors playing it, but also just to kind of really take in what was going on with the set design, because I think there was a lot of metaphor for the and thematic elements, I guess I'll say, mirrored in the set design. And it was just really well done. Man, that lake scene, Matt, that you mentioned, the fact that all they had was a round stage and a couple of diagonal lines going through it that had originally been the train tracks. Um, and then they were just essentially using kind of fog rolling in and the predominant colors of like gray and blue. And immediately when you saw it, you thought, oh, they're on a lake. And there was really nothing nothing else. I don't know, it was really extraordinary the way they did it. So uh I don't know, it's fascinating. But I really liked it. All right. Well, I think I mean, there's probably more we could discuss, but rather than drag this out into a super long episode, I think this is a good place to end it. I know a lot of us are stuck at home right now. I know it feels like we're living in a world where a lot of things have been taken away from us, but there are some good things that you can find. And I think just being able to see so many plays like this, like what the National Theater is doing, that people like myself, I wouldn't be able to go and experience this because I don't live in a big city where I can see a lot of these things. I can only read about them and think, "Oh man, that sounds really amazing. I wish I had a chance to watch it." And now we do. Now we have a chance to access a lot of these kind of things. So I think that's maybe a bright spot that we can take away from this, is that there's a lot of art out there. There's a lot of plays and movies and just some really neat creative ideas that are out in the world now that we're able to experience in a way we weren't before all of this started to happen. So I don't know. I'll take the one bright spot where I can get it, because sometimes it doesn't feel like there are a whole lot of them, but this was definitely one of them. I hope that you will go out and maybe watch Frankenstein. If you do, consider maybe letting us know that, because we'd love to hear your thoughts, maybe on the set design or what you thought of Elizabeth's character, or which creature was the best. Was it Cumberbatch or was it Miller? We'd love to hear from you. So, with that in mind, we're at No Fear Cast on Twitter and Instagram, and we have a Facebook page too. We also have an email address, nofearcast@gmail.com, and we try to respond to all of our emails. So please consider dropping us a note there. If you love what we're doing, please take a look at our Patreon. You'll get exclusive access or access to exclusive content, rather, if you support us on Patreon. So in the weeks in between our main episodes, we release Patreon exclusive episodes, and those are a lot of fun. So if you're wanting a little bit more No Fear Cast, then maybe consider doing that. If you don't have the means to do that right now, and we completely understand, you can simply rate and review us, which is entirely free, and it helps others listeners find us. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.